Hey everyone, it's Jordy. Can't sleep? You're not alone. Tonight, I've got some creepy stories that might just keep you company, or make it worse. Let me know where you're watching from. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Let's begin. The air in the abandoned Seneca Street station hung thick and stagnant, a miasma of dust, decay, and something else. Something acrid, like burnt sugar and old blood. I'd been a maintenance worker for the city for 27 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Rats the size of small dogs, homeless encampments that looked like refugee camps, graffiti that would make a sailor blush. But Seneca Street was different. It had a weight to it, a palpable sense of wrongness that settled in your bones and refused to leave. My job was simple. Check the structural integrity, make sure the tunnels weren't collapsing, and report anything unusual. Seneca Street had been closed for 50 years, deemed unsafe after a minor earthquake. Now, some developer wanted to build condos on the site, and I was the unlucky bastard sent to make sure it wasn't going to swallow the whole damn neighborhood. The entrance was sealed with a rusted steel door, padlocked and chained. I cut through the chain with my bolt cutters, the metallic snap echoing unnervingly in the cavernous space beyond. The padlock, thick and heavy, fell to the concrete with a dull thud. I pulled the door open, the hinges screaming in protest, revealing a black maw that seemed to suck the light from my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a platform covered in a thick layer of grime. The tracks were still there, rusted and overgrown with weeds that had somehow found their way into the subterranean world. The air was colder than it should have been, a damp chill that seeped into my clothes and made my teeth chatter. I took a tentative step onto the platform, the sound of my boots crunching on debris, the only sound in the oppressive silence. The silence was the worst part. In the other abandoned stations, you could hear the rumble of the city above, the distant sirens, the faint hum of electricity. But here, there was nothing. Just silence. I started my inspection, checking the walls for cracks, the ceiling for signs of collapse. The concrete was damp and crumbling, and in places, the rebar was exposed, twisted, and rusted like skeletal remains. I moved slowly, my flashlight beam dancing across the surfaces, searching for anything that might indicate structural weakness. About halfway down the platform, I noticed something odd. A section of the wall looked different. It was smoother, cleaner than the rest, and there was a faint outline of a door. I ran my hand along the surface, feeling for a seam, a handle, anything that would indicate an opening. And then I found it. A small, almost imperceptible crack in the concrete, just big enough to slip my fingernail into. I pried it, and with a groan of protesting stone, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden room. The air that rushed out of the room was even colder than the air in the station, and it carried with it a faint, sickly sweet smell that made my stomach churn. I hesitated for a moment, a prickle of unease running down my spine. I should report this, I thought. Call it in. But curiosity, that insidious human trait, got the better of me. I stepped into the room, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. And then I saw them. Mannequins. Dozens of them. Lifelike. Disturbingly so. They were posed in various scenarios, some sitting on benches, others standing in groups, as if waiting for a train that would never come. But it wasn't the mannequins themselves that were disturbing. It was the way they were posed. One mannequin was slumped against a wall, its head twisted at an unnatural angle, its eyes staring blankly ahead. Another was lying on the floor, its limbs contorted, its face frozen in a silent scream. A group of mannequins were huddled together, their faces buried in their hands, as if weeping. The scenes were unsettling, disturbing. They felt wrong, like a tableau of some forgotten tragedy. I moved further into the room, my flashlight beam sweeping across the mannequins. And then I noticed something else, something that made my blood run cold. Their expressions. They were changing. The mannequin slumped against the wall, the one with the twisted head. Its eyes were no longer staring blankly ahead. They were focused on me, and there was something in them, something malevolent. The mannequin on the floor, the one with the frozen scream. Its mouth was opening wider, its eyes widening in terror. And the group of mannequins huddled together, their faces were slowly lifting, their eyes turning towards me, filled with an unbearable sadness. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't right. This couldn't be right. Mannequins didn't move. Mannequins didn't change their expressions. But they were. I could see it. They were moving. Slowly. Subtly. But they were moving. I turned to run, to get out of that room, to get out of that station. But then I saw it. Blocking the doorway. A mannequin. Tall. Gaunt. Its face pale and expressionless. But its eyes were burning with an intense, hateful light. I froze, paralyzed with fear. The mannequin took a step towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. And then another, and another. I wanted to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped. The mannequin reached out a hand. Its fingers long and skeletal. It touched my face, its touch cold and clammy. And then it spoke. Its voice was a whisper, a dry rustling sound like leaves blowing in the wind. But I understood it. I understood every word. "You're not supposed to be here," it said. "This is our place, our home." And then the other mannequins started to move. They shuffled forward, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes fixed on me. They were closing in. I finally found my voice, a strangled, desperate cry. "What do you want?" I asked. The tall mannequin smiled, a slow, cruel smile that revealed teeth that were too long, too sharp. "We want you to stay," it said. "We want you to be one of us." The other mannequins reached out, their hands grasping at me, their touch cold and lifeless. I struggled against them, but they were too strong. There were too many of them. They dragged me down, onto the floor, and I felt their cold, clammy hands all over me. They started to pull at my clothes, tearing them, ripping them. I screamed, but no one could hear me. I was alone, trapped in a hidden room in an abandoned subway station, surrounded by living mannequins. They stripped me naked, and then they started to pose me. They twisted my limbs, contorted my body, forced my face into a grotesque expression. I tried to resist, but I was weak. They were strong. They were relentless. And then, finally, they were finished. They stepped back, their eyes fixed on me. I was lying on the floor, my body twisted and contorted, my face frozen in a silent scream. I was one of them. I was a mannequin. But even as I lay there, unmoving, unblinking, a single thought echoed in my mind. A thought that filled me with a cold, burning rage. I would get out. I would escape. I would make them pay. I just had to wait. I had to be patient. I had to wait for someone else to come. Someone else to find the hidden room. Someone else to become one of us. And then, together, we would escape. We would take our revenge. We would show them what it was like to be trapped, to be alone, to be a mannequin. The silence returned, heavier than before. The air hung thick with the scent of dust, decay, and the faint, sickly sweet smell that made my stomach churn. I lay there, unmoving, unblinking, waiting. Waiting for the next victim. Waiting for my chance. The days bled into weeks. The weeks into months. Time had no meaning in the hidden room. I existed only as a silent observer, a frozen tableau in a macabre scene. The other mannequins remained motionless, their expressions unchanging, their presence a constant, oppressive weight. I tried to remember my life before. My wife, Sarah. My dog, Buster. The small, comfortable house with the overgrown garden. But the memories were fading, becoming blurred and indistinct, like old photographs bleached by the sun. The only thing that remained clear was the burning desire for revenge. Then, one day, I heard it. A faint sound, a distant echo. The sound of footsteps. My non-existent heart leaped with anticipation. Someone was coming. Someone was going to find the hidden room. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear the sound of breathing, the rustle of clothing, and then the scraping of metal against metal. The sound of the door being opened. A beam of the light cut through the darkness, illuminating the room. I saw a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light. A young woman, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, her face hidden in shadow. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the room. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. The mannequins, the poses, the expressions. I could feel her fear, her unease. It was palpable, almost intoxicating. She moved slowly through the room, her eyes darting from one mannequin to another. She stopped in front of me, her gaze fixed on my frozen face. I tried to communicate, to send her a message, to warn her. But I was trapped, immobile, silent. She reached out a hand and touched my cheek. Her touch was warm, gentle. "What happened here?" she whispered. And then, the other mannequins started to move. Slowly, subtly, but they were moving. They shuffled forward, their eyes fixed on the woman. She gasped, her eyes widening in terror. She tried to run, but it was too late. The mannequins surrounded her, their cold, clammy hands reaching out. They grabbed her, pulled her down, onto the floor. She screamed, but her voice was quickly silenced. The mannequins were too strong. There were too many of them. They stripped her naked, and then they started to pose her. They twisted her limbs, contorted her body, forced her face into a grotesque expression. I watched, helpless, as they transformed her into one of us. And then, finally, they were finished. They stepped back, their eyes fixed on her. She was lying on the floor, her body twisted and contorted, her face frozen in a silent scream. She was a mannequin. But even as she lay there, unmoving, unblinking, I could feel her rage, her hatred. She would want revenge. She would want to escape. And then, I knew. We would escape. Together. We just had to wait. We had to be patient. We had to wait for the next victim. The silence returned, heavier than before. The air hung thick with the scent of dust, decay, and the faint, sickly sweet smell that made my stomach churn. I lay there, unmoving, unblinking, waiting. But now, I was not alone. I had an ally, a partner in my quest for revenge, and together, we would make them pay. The cycle continued. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Each new victim added to our ranks, each new mannequin fueling our collective rage. The hidden room became a grotesque gallery of frozen screams, a testament to the horrors that lurked beneath the city. We learned to communicate, a silent language of shared thoughts and emotions. We planned our escape, meticulously, patiently. We studied the patterns of the living, their routines, their weaknesses. And then, one day, we were ready. A group of teenagers, daring each other to explore the abandoned station, stumbled upon the hidden room. They were young, foolish, and full of bravado. They were perfect. We waited until they were deep inside the room, mesmerized by the macabre display. Then, we moved. The teenagers screamed, their bravado dissolving into abject terror. They tried to run, but we were too fast. We were too many. We overwhelmed them, dragged them down, and transformed them into mannequins. But this time, we didn't stop there. We used their bodies, their strength, to break free from our frozen poses. We shattered our porcelain shells, our limbs cracking and splintering. But we didn't care. We were free. We poured out of the hidden room, a horde of broken, grotesque mannequins, our eyes burning with hatred. We hunted down the teenagers who had escaped, their screams echoing through the tunnels. We didn't kill them. We did something much worse. We transformed them. We turned them into mannequins, adding them to our ranks. And then we emerged from the subway station into the city above. The city was ours now. We would transform it, one person at a time. We would turn everyone into mannequins, creating a silent, frozen world. A world where no one could feel pain, no one could feel fear, no one could feel anything at all. A world where we would finally be at peace. The transformation had changed me. I was no longer just a maintenance worker, trapped in a porcelain shell. I was something else, something more. I was a harbinger of silence, a bringer of stillness, a master of the macabre. I was the architect of a new world, and I would not rest until that world was complete. I walked through the streets, my broken limbs clicking and clacking on the pavement. People stared, their faces filled with fear and confusion, but their fear was fleeting. Soon, they would understand. Soon, they would join us. Soon, they would be silent. Soon, they would be still. Soon, they would be mannequins. The city was ours, and we were just getting started. The world would be next. Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The silence here isn't the absence of sound. It's a presence, thick and heavy, like a shroud woven from pine needles and damp earth. I came to this cabin to escape the noise, the relentless hum of a life that had become unbearable. Now, I long for it. I crave the cacophony of the city, the blare of horns, the mindless chatter of strangers. Anything to drown out the whispers that have begun to claw their way into my sanity. It started subtly. A feeling, more than anything. A prickling on the back of my neck when I walked into the woods. The sense of being watched by something unseen. I dismissed it as paranoia, the product of too much solitude, and a mind prone to dark imaginings. I told myself it was the wind rustling through the trees, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. Then came the carvings. The first one was small, almost hidden. A single word, etched into the bark of an ancient oak that stood sentinel at the edge of the clearing. Guilty. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs. Guilty of what? The question echoed in my mind, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the birdsong. I ran my fingers over the rough-hewn letters, the wood cold and unforgiving beneath my touch. It was a coincidence, I told myself. A prank. Some local kids messing around. But the unease lingered, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. I tried to ignore it. I focused on the mundane tasks of survival. Chopping wood, fetching water, tending to the small garden I had planted. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that the isolation was getting to me. But then came the second carving. This one was larger, bolder, carved into the trunk of a birch tree closer to the cabin. It was a phrase, a sentence that sent a shiver of ice down my spine. You wanted this, didn't you? My blood ran cold. How could anyone know? How could they know about the secret desires I had buried deep within my heart? The longings I had never dared to speak aloud? The cabin, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. The woods, once a source of solace, now seemed to be closing in, the trees leering at me with silent, knowing eyes. I started locking the doors at night, barricading myself inside the cabin. I slept with a hunting knife under my pillow, my senses on high alert. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent my heart racing. I was living in a constant state of fear, my mind teetering on the edge of madness. The carvings continued, each one more personal, more disturbing than the last. They spoke of my regrets, my failures, my darkest secrets. They knew about the affair that had shattered my marriage, the lie I had told to protect my career, the resentment I harbored towards my family. A broken promise, one carving read, etched into the trunk of a maple tree near the creek. She remembers. My stomach churned. The words were a direct reference to my sister, to a promise I had made to her years ago and failed to keep. How could anyone know about that? It was a secret I had guarded for years, a burden I carried alone. I started to suspect everyone. The old man who ran the general store in town, the hiker I had seen on the trail, even the mailman who delivered my meager supply of letters. But deep down, I knew it wasn't them. This was something else, something darker, something that defied explanation. I tried to find the person responsible. I spent hours scouring the woods, searching for footprints, for any sign of human presence. But there was nothing. Only the trees, the silence, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. The carvings became more frequent, more elaborate. They were no longer just words. They were images, symbols, grotesque representations of my fears and desires. One carving depicted a woman hanging from a tree, her face contorted in a silent scream. Another showed a child drowning in a lake, her eyes wide with terror. I started to lose track of time. Days blurred into nights, reality twisted and warped. I was no longer sure what was real and what was a figment of my imagination. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, heard whispers in the wind, felt cold hands brushing against my skin. The cabin itself seemed to be changing. The walls seemed to be closing in. The floorboards creaked and groaned with every step. The windows rattled in the wind like skeletal fingers. The air inside was thick and heavy, suffocating me with its oppressive presence. One night, I woke up to find a new carving on the door of the cabin. It was a single word, written in large, bold letters. Come. My heart pounded in my chest. Come where? Come to whom? The word hung in the air, a sinister invitation that I knew I couldn't ignore. I grabbed my hunting knife and stepped outside. The woods were bathed in moonlight, the trees casting long, eerie shadows. The air was still and silent, except for the faint rustling of leaves. I followed the path into the woods, my senses on high alert. The trees seemed to be guiding me, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The carvings continued, leading me deeper and deeper into the darkness. Deeper, one carving read. You're almost there. My breath hitched. Almost where? What was waiting for me in the darkness? As I ventured further, the trees grew denser, the shadows deeper. The air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring my vision. I felt a presence nearby, something ancient and malevolent. Then, I saw it. In the center of a small clearing, bathed in moonlight, stood a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its face hidden in shadow. It was holding something in its hand, something that glinted in the moonlight. As I drew closer, I realized what it was. A knife. The same knife I had been carrying. The figure raised its head, and I saw its face. It was my face. My own eyes stared back at me, filled with a cold, empty void. A twisted smile spread across my lips. You took your time, the figure said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. I've been waiting for you. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a hallucination. But the figure was there, solid and real, standing before me in the moonlight. Who are you? I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure chuckled, a hollow, chilling sound. I am you, it said. The part of you that you've been trying to hide. The part of you that you've been running from. No, I said, shaking my head. That's not true. It is true, the figure said. You know it is. You came here to escape your past, but you can't escape yourself. You can't escape your guilt, your regrets, your desires. The figure took a step closer, the knife glinting in its hand. You wanted this, didn't you? It said, echoing the words of the carving. You wanted to be free. You wanted to be rid of the pain, the suffering, the burden of your life. I stared at the figure, my mind racing. Was it true? Had I subconsciously summoned this entity, this dark reflection of myself? Had I come to this cabin not to escape, but to confront the demons within? It's time, the figure said, raising the knife. Time to end it all. Time to be free. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But then, I heard a voice. No! I opened my eyes and saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was a woman, her face etched with worry and concern. Don't do it, she said, her voice filled with emotion. You don't have to do this. I stared at the woman, my mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Who was she? Why was she here? Who are you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The woman smiled, a sad, gentle smile. I'm your sister, she said. I'm here to help you. My sister? But she was dead. She had died years ago, in a car accident. I don't understand, I said, my mind reeling. It's okay, she said. I know it's confusing, but I'm here now, and I'm not going to let you do this. She turned to the figure, her eyes filled with anger and defiance. Leave her alone, she said. She's been through enough. The figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. You can't stop me. it said. She belongs to me now. No, she doesn't, my sister said. She belongs to herself, and she deserves to be happy. The two figures faced each other, locked in a silent battle of wills. I stood there, paralyzed with fear and confusion, unsure of what to do. Then, my sister Tortor turned to me, her eyes filled with love and compassion. You have to fight it, she said. You have to fight for your life. You're stronger than you think. Her words resonated within me, stirring something deep inside. A spark of hope, a flicker of defiance. I looked at the figure, at the dark reflection of myself, and I realized that my sister was right. I couldn't let it win. I couldn't let it consume me. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my eyes fixed on the figure. You're not me, I said, my voice stronger now. You're just a part of me, a part that I can control. The figure sneered. You can't control me, it said. I am your darkness. I am your pain. I am your truth. No, I said. You're not my truth. My truth is that I'm stronger than this. I'm more than my mistakes. I'm more than my regrets. I reached out and grabbed the knife from the figure's hand. The metal was cold and sharp against my skin. I looked at the blade, at the reflection of my own face staring back at me. Then, I turned the knife and plunged it into the ground. The figure screamed, a piercing, agonizing sound that echoed through the woods. It writhed and contorted, its form dissolving into nothingness. As the figure disappeared, the fog began to dissipate. The shadows receded, and the moonlight shone down upon me. I stood there, trembling, the knife still clutched in my hand. My sister stepped forward and embraced me, her arms warm and comforting. You did it, she said. You defeated it. I clung to her, tears streaming down my face. I don't understand, I said. How did you do this? I can't explain it, she said. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, until the first rays of dawn began to break through the trees. As the sun rose, the woods seemed to come alive, the birds singing, the leaves rustling in the wind. The cabin no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home. The carvings were still there, etched into the trees, but they no longer held the same power. They were just words, just symbols, reminders of the darkness I had overcome. I knew that the darkness would always be a part of me, but I also knew that I was stronger than it. I had faced my demons, and I had survived. I spent the next few days cleaning the cabin, repairing the damage, and tending to the garden. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. My sister stayed with me, helping me to heal, to rebuild my life. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our memories, our hopes for the future. One morning, I woke up to find her gone. There was a note on the pillow, written in her familiar handwriting. I have to go now, it read, but I'll always be with you. Remember what you learned here. Remember that you are loved. And never give up on yourself. I smiled, tears welling up in my eyes. I knew that she was right. I would never give up on myself. I stayed in the cabin for a few more weeks, enjoying the solitude, the peace, the beauty of the woods. Then, I packed my bags and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I was ready to face the world again. I had learned a valuable lesson in the woods, a lesson about the power of the human spirit, the importance of self-love, and the enduring strength of family. As I walked away from the cabin, I looked back one last time. The trees stood tall and proud, their branches reaching towards the sky. The carvings were still there, but they no longer frightened me. They were just a reminder of the journey I had taken, the darkness I had overcome, and the light I had found within myself. I turned and walked away, my heart filled with hope, my spirit renewed. The silence of the woods was no longer a threat. It was a promise of peace, of healing, of a new beginning. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees and the shadows dance on the walls, I swear I can still hear the whispers. And I wonder, just for a moment, if the carvings are still there, waiting for someone else to find them. Waiting to whisper their secrets, their desires, their darkest fears. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that the woods never truly forget. They remember everything, and they wait. Your eyes are still open, and so is the night. Let's move to the next story. It's not any softer than the last. The sterile white walls of the sleep lab felt less like a sanctuary of science, and more like the inside of a coffin. I'd signed up for this study, hoping for a quick buck and a few nights of decent sleep. Insomnia had been my unwelcome companion for years, a relentless tormentor that painted the world in shades of exhaustion and anxiety. Now, on the third night, I was starting to think I'd made a terrible mistake. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I'd been hooked up to a tangle of wires, my brain waves monitored, my heart rate tracked. I'd drifted off to sleep, or at least I thought I had. The researchers, faceless figures in lab coats, assured me I was sleeping, albeit fitfully. But tonight was different. Tonight, the nightmares began. It started subtly, a creeping unease that settled in my stomach like a stone. I was in my childhood home, but it was wrong. The familiar wallpaper was peeling, revealing a dark, viscous substance beneath. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. My parents were there, but their faces were blurred, their voices distorted into a guttural growl. They were beckoning me, their hands outstretched, but their eyes were empty sockets, filled with a swirling black void. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs were leaden, rooted to the spot. They were getting closer, their decaying hands reaching for me, their touch promising oblivion. Then I woke up, or at least I thought I did. I was back in the sleep lab, the familiar hum of the machines. A welcome sound, but something was off. The air was heavy, the same cloying sweetness lingering in my nostrils. The white walls seemed to pulse, the shadows dancing in the periphery of my vision. I looked down at my hands, and a jolt of pure terror shot through me. There, on my skin, were faint, almost imperceptible smudges of a dark, viscous substance. I ripped the wires off my body, ignoring the protests crackling from the speakers. I had to get out of there. I stumbled out of the room and into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was deserted, the silence broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the machines. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. Reached the main entrance, my hand trembling as I pushed open the heavy door. The night air was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I ran, not knowing where I was going, just needing to escape the suffocating dread that had taken root in my soul. I found myself on a deserted road, the only light coming from the pale glow of the moon. The trees loomed over me, their branches gnarled and twisted like skeletal fingers. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it a faint, almost inaudible murmur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking just beyond the edge of the darkness. I kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated house. It stood silhouetted against the moonlit sky, a gothic monstrosity of crumbling stone and decaying wood. The windows were dark and empty, like vacant eyes staring out into the night. A sense of foreboding washed over me, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I was too exhausted, too terrified to keep going. I pushed open the creaking gate and walked up the overgrown path to the front door. The door was unlocked, or perhaps it had simply rotted away, leaving a gaping hole in the wall. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The air inside the house was thick with dust and decay. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of mildew, rot, and something else. Something indefinably sinister. The floorboards groaned under my weight, the sound echoing through the silent house. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows that danced and shifted with every gust of wind. I wandered through the house, each room more unsettling than the last. The furniture was covered in cobwebs, the walls stained with damp. In one room, I found a child's rocking horse, its paint peeling, its eyes missing. In another, I found a collection of antique dolls, their porcelain faces cracked and chipped, their glassy eyes staring blankly ahead. The deeper I went into the house, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. I could feel eyes on me, cold and malevolent, following my every move. I could hear whispers, faint and indistinct, just beyond the range of hearing. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, the product of exhaustion and fear. But deep down, I knew it was something more. I found myself in the library, a large room filled with towering bookshelves. The books were old and leather-bound, their titles obscured by dust and grime. I ran my fingers along the spines, a sense of unease creeping over me. The air in the room was heavy, oppressive, as if the walls were closing in. Then I saw it. A book, lying open on a table in the center of the room. The pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams, written in a language I didn't recognize. As I stared at the book, the symbols began to shift and writhe, as if they were alive. A voice, cold and disembodied, echoed in my mind. "You shouldn't be here." I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward. The book slammed shut, the sound echoing through the silent house. I turned and ran, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the library. I found myself in the hallway, the shadows lengthening, the whispers growing louder. I could feel something behind me, something cold and malevolent, gaining on me. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached the front door, my hand outstretched to push it open, but it was gone. The door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of stone. I was trapped. Panic seized me, a cold, suffocating wave that threatened to drown me. I pounded on the wall, screaming for help, but no one could hear me. I was alone, trapped in this nightmare house, with whatever was lurking in the shadows. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a chorus of voices, chanting my name. The shadows danced and writhed, taking on grotesque shapes. I could feel the presence behind me, closer now, its breath cold on my neck. I turned around, my eyes wide with terror. Standing before me was a figure, shrouded in darkness. Its face was obscured, its features indistinct, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and malevolent, piercing through the darkness. The figure raised its hand, and a single word echoed through the house. "Welcome." Then everything went black. I woke up screaming, my body drenched in sweat. I was back in the sleep lab, the familiar hum of the machines a welcome sound. The researchers were there, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right?" one of them asked. "You were having a nightmare." I looked around the room, my heart still pounding in my chest. The white walls seemed to pulse, the shadows dancing in the periphery of my vision. I looked down at my hands, and a jolt of pure terror shot through me. There, on my skin, were faint, almost imperceptible smudges of a dark, viscous substance. I ripped the wires off my body and stumbled out of the room, ignoring the protests of the researchers. I had to get out of there. I had to get away from this place. I ran out of the sleep lab and into the street, the cold night air a welcome relief. I kept running, not knowing where I was going, just needing to escape the suffocating dread that had taken root in my soul. But as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I could feel eyes on me, cold and malevolent, following my every move. I could hear whispers, faint and indistinct, just beyond the range of hearing. I looked back, and in the shadows, I saw it. The figure, shrouded in darkness, its face obscured, its eyes cold and malevolent. It was following me. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the figure kept pace with me, its presence growing stronger with every step. I realized then that I couldn't escape it. It was a part of me, a darkness that had taken root in my soul. The nightmares had bled into reality, blurring the line between what was real and what was not. I stopped running and turned to face the figure. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It simply stood there, its eyes fixed on me, its presence radiating a cold, malevolent energy. Then, it raised its hand, and a single word echoed in my mind. "Return." I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that I had to obey. I turned and walked back towards the sleep lab, the figure following close behind. As I walked, I began to remember things. Things that I had forgotten. Things that I had tried to suppress. Memories of a childhood trauma. A dark secret that I had buried deep within my subconscious. The sleep study wasn't just a study. It was a ritual. A way to unlock the darkness within me. To unleash the monster that I had kept hidden for so long. The house, the figure, the nightmares. They were all real. They were all a part of me. I reached the sleep lab and walked inside, the figure following close behind. The researchers were waiting for me, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Welcome back," one of them said, his voice trembling. "We've been expecting you." They led me back to the room where the nightmares had begun. They strapped me back into the machines, the wires cold against my skin. "It's time to finish what we started," one of them said. I closed my eyes and waited. The nightmares returned, more vivid, more terrifying than before. I was back in the house, the shadows lengthening, the whispers growing louder. The figure was there, standing before me, its eyes cold and malevolent. It raised its hand, and a single word echoed through the house. Embrace. I opened my eyes and embraced the darkness. The world dissolved around me, the boundaries between reality and nightmare fading away. I was no longer myself. I was something else, something darker, something more powerful. I was the monster that had been lurking within me all along. The researchers watched in horror as my body contorted and twisted, my features changing, my eyes glowing with an unholy light. They tried to stop me, but it was too late. I had become the nightmare. I turned to them, my voice a guttural growl. "Now," I said, "it's your turn to sleep." The sleep lab became my hunting ground, the researchers my prey. I stalked them through the corridors, their screams echoing through the silent building. I was no longer a victim. I was the predator. The nightmares had consumed me, transforming me into something monstrous. I was trapped in a world of darkness and terror, with no hope of escape. But as I reveled in the chaos and destruction, a small part of me, a flicker of my former self, remained. A part of me that remembered what it was like to be human, to feel love, to feel compassion. And that part of me, that small flicker of humanity, whispered a single word: wake up. I don't know if I can. The darkness is too strong, the nightmares too real. But I have to try. I have to wake up, before it's too late, before I lose myself completely, before the nightmare consumes me forever. I am writing this now, in the brief moments of clarity that I can muster, hoping that someone, somewhere, will find it. Hoping that someone will understand what happened to me. Hoping that someone will learn from my mistakes. Don't trust the sleep studies. Don't trust the researchers. Don't trust the promises of a good night's sleep. Because sometimes, the cure is worse than the disease. And sometimes, the nightmares are real. I can feel the darkness closing in again. The whispers are growing louder, the shadows lengthening. The figure is standing before me, its eyes cold and malevolent. It's time for me to sleep again. But before I go, I have one last thing to say. Beware the house. Beware the shadows. Beware the nightmares. Because they are waiting for you. They are always waiting. And when you least expect it, they will come for you. And there will be no escape. The darkness is here. Goodbye. Another story gone, but no sleep yet. Maybe this next one will be the reason you can't close your eyes at all. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of moonlight slicing through the grimy window, each a tiny, frantic star in the oppressive darkness. The air in the Blackwood Sanatorium hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the scent of decay, mildew, and something else. Something acrid, like burnt sugar and fear. I hadn't seen another soul since I'd slipped through the rusted gates 3 days ago, and yet I was far from alone. It started subtly, a whisper at the edge of hearing, like the wind sighing through broken panes. I dismissed it as the old building settling, the groans and complaints of a structure slowly surrendering to time. But the whispers grew bolder, morphing into fragmented words, names I couldn't quite grasp, laced with a chilling undercurrent of malice. The shadows, too, began to play tricks. They stretched and writhed, mimicking shapes that weren't there, figures lurking just beyond the periphery of my vision. I'd catch a glimpse of a hunched form in a darkened doorway, only to find it vanish when I turned to face it directly. A fleeting impression of a face pressed against a window pane, gaunt and pale, with eyes that burned like embers. I told myself it was the isolation, the lack of sleep, the sheer oppressive atmosphere of the place. Blackwood had a reputation, a history steeped in suffering and madness. They said the walls themselves held the echoes of the tormented souls who had been confined within. I came here seeking inspiration, a jolt to reignite my stagnant writing career. Now, I feared I'd found something far more sinister. The second night was worse. The whispers intensified, coalescing into coherent phrases, taunts that seemed to burrow into my mind. "Lost!" they hissed. "Forgotten. Alone." They knew my fears, my insecurities, the doubts that gnawed at my soul. It was as if the sanatorium itself was reading my thoughts, twisting them into weapons against me. I tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for the escalating phenomena. But logic had no place in Blackwood. The building seemed to defy the laws of physics, the corridors shifting and changing, leading me in circles. Doors that had been locked were now open. Rooms that had been empty were now filled with unsettling artifacts, rusted surgical instruments, tattered patient records, and disturbing drawings scrawled on the walls. One room, in particular, drew me in like a moth to a flame. It was a padded cell, the walls stained with a dark, viscous substance that smelled faintly of blood. In the center of the room, a single rocking chair swayed gently, as if occupied by an unseen presence. I could feel a cold spot in the air, a palpable sense of dread that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the silent corridors like a gunshot. Panic seized me, a cold, paralyzing fear that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Then, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic humming, coming from the rocking chair. It grew louder, closer, until it filled the entire room, vibrating in my bones. I turned to face the chair, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw it. A figure sat in the chair, shrouded in shadow, its features obscured by the darkness. But I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my soul. It raised a hand, long and skeletal, and beckoned me closer. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure began to speak, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to claw its way into my mind. "You came here seeking inspiration," it said, "but you will find only despair." It began to show me things, visions that flashed before my eyes, images of my past failures, my deepest regrets, my darkest secrets. It showed me the faces of those I had hurt, the opportunities I had squandered, the dreams I had abandoned. The visions intensified, becoming more vivid, more real. I felt the pain of my past mistakes, the shame of my failures, the crushing weight of my regrets. It was as if the entity was peeling back the layers of my psyche, exposing the raw, festering wounds beneath. I screamed, begging it to stop, but it only laughed, a hollow, mocking sound that echoed through the room. It reveled in my pain, feeding on my despair, growing stronger with each passing moment. The visions began to twist, to distort, to become something monstrous. The faces of those I had loved morphed into grotesque caricatures, their eyes filled with hatred and contempt. The memories of happy moments were tainted with a sense of dread, as if something terrible was lurking just beneath the surface. I felt my sanity slipping away, my grip on reality loosening. I no longer knew what was real and what was not. The line between my past and my present, my memories and my nightmares, had blurred into a single, terrifying tapestry. The entity reached out to me, its touch cold and clammy. It pressed its fingers against my forehead, and I felt a surge of energy coursing through my veins. My mind exploded with images, a chaotic jumble of thoughts and emotions, memories and fantasies. I saw myself as a child, lost and alone in a dark forest. I saw myself as a teenager, filled with anger and resentment. I saw myself as an adult, consumed by ambition and greed. And then, I saw myself as I truly was, a broken, pathetic creature, devoid of talent, incapable of love, destined for failure. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It was the truth, the undeniable truth, that I had been running from my entire life. I was nothing. I was worthless. The entity smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Now you understand," it whispered. "You are nothing." It released its grip on my forehead, and I collapsed to the floor, a broken, empty shell. The visions faded, the whispers subsided, and the room fell silent. I lay there for what seemed like an eternity, staring up at the ceiling, my mind blank, my soul empty. I had nothing left. The entity had taken everything. Then, I heard a sound, a faint scratching, coming from the corner of the room. I turned my head and saw it. A rat, gnawing at the baseboard. It looked up at me, its eyes beady and black, and then scurried away. I watched it go, and a strange feeling began to stir within me. It wasn't hope, not exactly, but it was something akin to it. A flicker of defiance, a spark of resistance. I was broken, yes. I was empty, yes. But I was not defeated. I slowly, painfully pushed myself to my feet. My body ached. My mind was still reeling, but I stood. I walked to the door, and this time it opened. I stepped out of the padded cell and into the corridor. The sanatorium was still dark, still silent, still oppressive, but it no longer held the same power over me. I had faced my demons, and I had survived. I began to walk, slowly at first, then faster, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to leave Blackwood. I had to escape the darkness that had consumed me. As I walked, I began to remember things. Not the twisted, distorted memories that the entity had shown me, but the real ones, the good ones, the moments of joy, the acts of kindness, the connections I had made with others. I remembered my parents who had loved me unconditionally. I remembered my friends who had supported me through thick and thin. I remembered my wife who had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. These memories gave me strength, a renewed sense of purpose. I was not nothing. I was someone. I was loved. I reached the front door of the sanatorium and pushed it open. The fresh air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the surrounding landscape. I stepped outside and began to walk away from Blackwood, leaving the darkness behind me. I knew that the entity would always be a part of me, a shadow lurking in the depths of my mind. But I also knew that I was stronger than it. I had survived, and I would continue to survive. I walked for miles until I reached the nearest town. I found a phone booth and called my wife. "I'm okay," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm coming home." Her voice on the other end of the line was filled with relief. "I'm so glad," she said. "I've been so worried." I hung up the phone and closed my eyes. I was still afraid, still haunted by the memories of Blackwood, but I was also filled with a sense of hope. I had a second chance, a chance to rebuild my life, to make amends for my past mistakes, to be the person I was meant to be. I opened my eyes and looked up at the sky. The sun was shining brightly, and the world seemed full of possibilities. I began to walk again, towards home, towards the light. But even now, years later, sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the whispers. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. And I know that Blackwood is still there, waiting, watching, and that the entity is still a part of me, a shadow that will never truly disappear. The nightmares are the worst. They come unbidden, replaying the horrors I witnessed in the sanatorium. The padded cell, the rocking chair, the skeletal figure shrouded in darkness. The visions of my past failures, the faces of those I had hurt, the crushing weight of my regrets. And then, the entity speaks, its voice a raspy whisper that seems to claw its way into my mind. "You are nothing," it says. "You will always be nothing." I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. My wife is there, holding me, comforting me. "It's just a dream," she says. "It's not real, but I know it is real. The entity is real. It's a part of me, a darkness that I can never escape. I try to ignore it, to push it away, to focus on the good things in my life. My wife, my family, my work. But the darkness is always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. Sometimes I feel it getting stronger, its influence growing. I become irritable, withdrawn, prone to fits of anger and despair. I start to doubt myself, to question my abilities, to fear the future. My wife sees it happening, and she tries to help. She encourages me to talk about my feelings, to seek therapy, to find healthy ways to cope with my stress. I try, but it's not enough. The darkness is too strong. It's like a cancer, slowly eating away at my soul. I know that one day it will consume me completely. I will lose myself in the darkness, and I will become the monster that I have always feared. And then the entity will have won. I often wonder why I went to Blackwood in the first place. Was it really for inspiration? Or was it something else? Something darker? Something more sinister? Perhaps I was drawn to the sanatorium, subconsciously seeking out the darkness that already resided within me. Perhaps I wanted to confront my demons, to face my fears, to test my limits. Or perhaps I was simply destined to go there. Perhaps it was fate, a predetermined path that I could not escape. I don't know the answer. All I know is that Blackwood changed me. It broke me, and it left me with a darkness that will never truly leave. I try to live my life as best as I can. I try to be a good husband, a good father, a good friend. I try to make a positive impact on the world. But the darkness is always there, whispering in my ear, reminding me of my failures, my regrets, my insignificance. And sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. If it's worth fighting against the darkness, knowing that it will eventually win. But then, I look at my wife, at my children, at the people who love me, and I know that it is worth it. It is worth fighting for them, for their happiness, for their future. I will never give up. I will never surrender to the darkness. I will fight until my last breath. Because even in the darkest of nights, there is always a flicker of hope, a spark of light that can never be extinguished. And that is what I will hold on to. That is what will keep me going. That is what will save me. Or perhaps it will simply delay the inevitable. Perhaps the darkness will eventually consume me, regardless of my efforts. But even if that is the case, I will not go down without a fight. I will resist until the very end. Because that is all can do. That is all any of us can do. Fight the darkness, embrace the light, and never give up hope. The other day, I found a small, tarnished key tucked away in an old box in the attic. It was intricately designed, with a strange symbol etched into its head, a spiral within a circle. I didn't recognize it, but something about it felt familiar. A chill ran down my spine. I knew instinctively that this key belonged to Blackwood. I haven't been back to the sanatorium since that day, years ago. I swore I never would. But the key, it's like a siren's call, a dark invitation I can't ignore. I know it's a terrible idea. I know that going back to Blackwood would be like walking into the lion's den, surrendering myself to the entity that nearly destroyed me. But I can't help myself. The key has awakened something within me, a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand what happened there, to finally put the past to rest. I'm leaving tonight. I'm packing a bag, gathering my courage, and preparing myself for the worst. I don't know what I'll find at Blackwood. I don't know if I'll survive. But I have to go. I have to face my demons, once and for all. I'm writing this now, as a final testament, a warning to anyone who might stumble upon it. If you ever find yourself drawn to a place like Blackwood, a place steeped in darkness and despair, turn away. Run. Don't look back. Because some doors are better left unopened, some secrets are better left buried, and some demons are better left undisturbed. I'm leaving now. The sun is setting, casting long, ominous shadows across the room. The air is thick with anticipation, with a sense of impending doom. I can hear the whispers again, faint but persistent, calling my name. Come home, they say. Come home. I'm going home, but I fear I'll never return. The car ride was agonizing. Each mile closer to Blackwood felt like a lead weight dragging me down. The landscape grew increasingly desolate. The trees gnarled and twisted, the sky a bruised purple. It was as if the very earth was rejecting my presence. I pulled up to the rusted gates, the same gates I had slipped through years ago. They were even more dilapidated now, hanging precariously on their hinges, groaning in the wind like tortured souls. I got out of the car, the key heavy in my pocket. The air was thick with the familiar scent of decay and fear. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling as I reached for the gate. Then, I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The sanatorium loomed before me, a dark, imposing silhouette against the twilight sky. It looked even more sinister than I remembered, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the darkness. I walked towards the entrance, my footsteps echoing through the silent grounds. The front door was ajar, as if inviting me in. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was just as I remembered it, dark, dusty, and filled with the oppressive atmosphere of despair. The air was cold and stagnant, and the silence was deafening. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it down the corridor. The shadows danced and writhed, mimicking shapes that weren't there. The whispers began again, faint but persistent, calling my name. I ignored them and walked forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to find the room that the key unlocked. I wandered through the labyrinthine corridors, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I passed the padded cell, the room with the rocking chair, the room with the disturbing drawings on the walls. Each room brought back a flood of memories, a wave of fear and despair. Finally, I found it. A small, unassuming door at the end of a long, dark corridor. It was locked. I took out the key and inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned the key, and the lock clicked open. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was small and circular, with no windows. In the center of the room, there was a pedestal, and on the pedestal, there was a book. The book was bound in leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. It looked ancient, as if it had been there for centuries. I walked over to the pedestal and picked up the book. The leather felt cold and clammy in my hands. I opened the book and began to read. The words were written in a language I didn't recognize, but I understood them nonetheless. They spoke of the entity, of its origins, of its power. It was a being of pure darkness, born from the collective suffering of humanity. It fed on fear, on despair, on negative emotions. It could manipulate minds, distort reality, and drive people to madness. And it was trapped in Blackwood, bound to the sanatorium by an ancient ritual. But the ritual was weakening. The entity was growing stronger, and it was looking for a way to escape. I turned the page, my hands trembling. The next passage described the key I held in my pocket. The key was not just a key, it was a conduit, a link between the entity and the outside world. It could be used to break the ritual, to release the entity from its prison, but only if it was used by someone who was already connected to the entity. Someone who had been touched by its darkness. Someone like me. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I understood now. I understood why I had been drawn to Blackwood. I understood why the key had called to me. I was meant to release the entity. I was meant to unleash it upon the world. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't allow that to happen. I had to destroy the key. I tried to break it, to smash it against the pedestal, but it wouldn't budge. It was too strong, too resilient. Then, I remembered something. The book had mentioned a counter-ritual, a way to strengthen the entity's prison, to bind it to Blackwood forever. But the ritual required a sacrifice of something precious, something meaningful, a sacrifice of myself. I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and began to chant the words of the counter-ritual. The words flowed from my lips, ancient and powerful, filling the room with a strange energy. As I chanted, I felt the entity stirring within me, fighting against the ritual. It tried to break free, to take control of my mind. But I resisted. I focused on my memories, on the good things in my life, on the people I loved. I used their strength to fuel the ritual, to bind the entity to Blackwood. The room began to shake, the walls to crack. The air grew thick with electricity, and the whispers intensified, becoming screams of rage and frustration. The entity was losing. It was being forced back into its prison. I continued to chant, my voice growing stronger, my resolve unwavering. I would not let it escape. I would not let it destroy the world. Finally, the ritual reached its climax. A blinding light filled the room, and a deafening roar echoed through the sanatorium. Then, silence. The light faded, the shaking stopped, and the whispers ceased. The room was still, silent, and empty. Except for me. I stood there, exhausted but triumphant. I had done it. I had saved the world. But at a cost. I felt the entity within me, weaker now, but still present. It was bound to me, forever. I would never be free of it. I would always be haunted by its darkness. But I had made my choice. I had sacrificed myself to protect others, and that was enough. I walked out of the room, leaving the key behind. I didn't need it anymore. I walked out of the sanatorium, leaving the darkness behind. I didn't want it anymore. I walked away from Blackwood, towards the rising sun. I was going home, but I knew that a part of me would always remain there, trapped in the darkness, bound to the entity. And that was my penance, my eternal punishment. But I would bear it. I would carry the burden of my sacrifice, because that is what heroes do. They sacrificed themselves for the greater good. And I was a hero, even if no one else knew it. Even if I didn't believe it myself. I was a hero. And that was all that mattered. I drove away from Blackwood, the sun rising in my rearview mirror. The sanatorium receded into the distance, a dark and ominous silhouette against the dawn sky. I knew I would never see it again, and I was grateful for that. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the entity was still with me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. Just the empty road stretching out before me. I shook my head and tried to focus on the road, but the feeling persisted. I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out the whispers in my head. But they were still there, faint but persistent, calling my name. "You are nothing," they said. "You will always be nothing." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. I would not let them win. I would not let them destroy me. I would fight them until my last breath. But as I drove, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice. Had I really saved the world? Or had I simply condemned myself to a lifetime of torment? And what if the entity wasn't really trapped in Blackwood? What if it was already out there, spreading its darkness across the world? What if I had simply made things worse? The question swirled in my head, driving me to the brink of madness. I wanted to scream, to cry, to give up, but I couldn't. I had to keep going. I had to keep fighting. Because that is what heroes do. They never give up. They never surrender. They fight until the very end, even when they know they are going to lose. As I drove, I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. A figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes burning like embers. I recognized her. It was my wife, but she was dead. She had died years ago in a car accident. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The car skidded to a halt, just a few feet from the figure. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Was this a hallucination? A trick of the light? Or was it something else? The figure smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Hello, darling," she said, her voice a raspy whisper that seemed to claw its way into my mind. "I've been waiting for you." Then, she stepped into the road, and the world went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body aching, my head throbbing. My wife was sitting beside me, holding my hand. "You're awake?" she said, her voice filled with relief. "Thank God." I looked at her, confused. "What happened?" I asked. "You crashed your car," she said. "You were driving too fast, and you lost control. You're lucky to be alive." I tried to remember what had happened, but my mind was blank. I couldn't recall anything after leaving Blackwood. "Blackwood," I said, the name sending a shiver down my spine. "I was there. I saw things. Terrible things." My wife frowned. "Blackwood? What are you talking about? You haven't been to Blackwood in years." "But I was there," I insisted. "I released the entity. I sacrificed myself to save the world." My wife squeezed my hand tighter. "You're delirious," she said. "You need to rest. It was just a dream." But I knew it wasn't a dream. It was real. All of it. The entity was still out there, and it had found a way to get to me. It had used my wife, my dead wife, to lure me into a trap. And now, I was trapped. Trapped in a hospital bed, at the mercy of the entity. I looked at my wife, her face filled with concern. But I knew that it wasn't really her. It was the entity, wearing her skin, using her voice. It had won. It had finally broken me. I closed my eyes and waited for the darkness to consume me. But it never came. Instead, I heard a voice. A familiar voice. "It's not over yet," the voice said. "You can still fight." I opened my eyes and saw him, standing at the foot of my bed. It was me, but not the me that I was now. The me that I had been before Blackwood. The me that was strong, confident, and full of hope. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm you," he said. "The you that you used to be. The you that you can be again." "But how?" I asked. "The entity has me. It's too strong." "You're stronger," he said. "You just have to remember who you are. Remember what you're fighting for." He reached out his hand to me. "Come on," he said. "Let's go." I hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. And suddenly, I was standing beside him, looking down at my body in the hospital bed. "What's happening?" I asked. "We're going inside," he said. "We're going to fight the entity. We're going to take back our life." He turned and walked towards the hospital bed. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. We stepped into my body, and the world exploded with light and sound. I was back in my head, face to face with the entity. It was a monstrous creature, a swirling mass of darkness and despair. It loomed over me, its eyes burning with hatred. "You can't defeat me," it said, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to claw its way into my mind. "I am you. You are nothing without me." "No," I said. "You're not me. You're just a part of me, a dark part that I can overcome." I reached out my hand and summoned my memories, the good ones, the ones that gave me strength. I showed the entity my parents, my friends, my wife. I showed it the moments of joy, the acts of kindness, the connections I had made with others. The entity recoiled, hissing in pain. It couldn't stand the light. I continued to bombard it with my memories, pushing it back, weakening it. "You can't win," it said. "I'm too strong. I'll always be a part of you." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm stronger, and I'll never give up." I summoned all of my strength, all of my courage, all of my love, and I unleashed it upon the entity. The entity screamed, a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of my being. It writhed and twisted, trying to escape, but it was too late. I had it cornered. I closed my eyes and focused all of my energy on destroying it. I imagined it fading away, dissolving into nothingness. And then, it was gone. The darkness lifted, and I was left standing alone in my head. I was free. I opened my eyes and looked around. I was back in the hospital bed, my wife sitting beside me, holding my hand. But this time, it was really her. I could feel it. I smiled at her, and she smiled back. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm really okay." She squeezed my hand tighter. "I know," she said. "I can see it in your eyes." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The entity was gone. The darkness was gone. I was finally free, but I knew that I would never forget what had happened. I would always remember Blackwood and the entity that had tried to destroy me, and I would always be grateful for the second chance that I had been given. A chance to live my life to the fullest. A chance to be the person I was meant to be. A chance to be a hero. I opened my eyes and looked at my wife. "I love you," I said. "I love you too," she said. And in that moment, I knew that everything was going to be all right. The darkness was gone. The light had won. and I was finally home. You're still here? Then you're ready. The next story is waiting in the dark. Let's begin. The trail had vanished hours ago, not in a dramatic, cliff-edge crumbling into the abyss kind of way, but more insidious. A gradual thinning, a subtle shift in the undergrowth, until the familiar packed earth and telltale boot prints were simply gone. I should have turned back then. Pride, or perhaps a stubborn refusal to admit I was lost, kept me pushing deeper into the woods. The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from pine needles and damp earth. The sun, a distant memory, struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I told myself it was just the wildlife, deer or squirrels, maybe even a harmless rabbit. But the silence that followed each sound was too profound, too expectant. It felt like something was listening, waiting. I stumbled upon the village quite by accident, or perhaps I was led to it. One moment, I was battling through a thicket of thorny bushes. The next, I was standing on the edge of a clearing, staring at a cluster of ramshackle huts huddled together like frightened animals. Smoke curled lazily from a central fire pit, carrying with it a strange, acrid smell that made my stomach churn. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. Civilization. People. I wasn't alone. As I approached, the villagers emerged from their dwellings, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. They were a gaunt, weathered people, their clothes patched and faded, their eyes unnervingly intense. They spoke in a dialect I didn't recognize, a guttural tongue that sounded more like the croaking of ravens than human speech. Despite the language barrier, they seemed welcoming enough. An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, gestured for me to sit by the fire. A young girl, no older than 10, offered me a bowl of thick gray stew. I ate it gratefully, ignoring the unsettling texture and the metallic tang that lingered on my tongue. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing, the villagers began to gather around the fire. Their faces were illuminated by the flickering flames, their eyes reflecting the dancing light. The old woman began to chant in that strange, guttural language, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. The other villagers joined in, their voices blending together into a discordant chorus that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ask what was happening, but they ignored me, their eyes fixed on the fire. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied. The air crackled with an unseen energy. I felt a growing sense of unease, a primal fear that clawed at the edges of my sanity. That's when I saw it. Hidden in the shadows behind the huts, a crude wooden idol stood sentinel. It was tall and imposing, its features grotesque and distorted. Its eyes were hollow sockets, filled with what looked like dried blood. Around its neck, a necklace of human teeth gleamed in the firelight. The chanting reached a crescendo. The villagers began to sway back and forth, their bodies moving in unison. The old woman raised her hands to the sky, her voice a piercing shriek. And then, they turned to me. Their eyes, no longer curious, no longer welcoming, were filled with a cold, unwavering purpose. I saw it then, the truth that had been lurking beneath the surface of their unsettling hospitality. I wasn't a guest. I was a sacrifice. Panic seized me. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over the bowl of stew. The villagers didn't react. They simply stared at me, their faces impassive. I ran. I plunged back into the woods, the chanting echoing in my ears. Thorns tore at my clothes, branches whipped at my face, but I didn't stop. I ran as if my life depended on it, because it did. I didn't dare look back. I knew they were coming. I could feel their presence behind me, a silent, relentless pursuit. The forest, once a source of fear, now seemed like my only ally. I ducked behind trees, crawled through bushes, anything to put distance between myself and the village. As I ran, I began to notice things. Strange symbols carved into the trees, symbols that mirrored the ones on the wooden idol. Small piles of stones, arranged in unnatural patterns. The air grew colder, heavier. The silence was no longer expectant, but oppressive, suffocating. I stumbled upon a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. The windows were boarded up, the roof sagged, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. But it was shelter, a place to hide. I pushed the door open and slipped inside. The air inside was stale and musty, thick with the smell of decay. Dust motes danced in the faint light that filtered through the cracks in the walls. The only furniture was a rickety table and a couple of broken chairs. I barricaded the door with the table, hoping it would buy me some time. I huddled in a corner, my heart pounding in my chest. I listened, straining to hear any sign of the villagers. Silence. But it wasn't a comforting silence. It was a silence that hummed with an unseen energy. A silence that felt alive. I told myself I was safe, that they wouldn't find me. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. They were out there, waiting. As the hours passed, the silence began to play tricks on my mind. I started to hear things, faint whispers, just at the edge of hearing. Creaking floorboards, even though I hadn't moved. Fleeting shadows that danced in the corners of my eyes. I tried to rationalize it. The wind, my imagination. The stress of the situation. But the explanations felt hollow, inadequate. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if something was inside the cabin, with me. Something unseen. Something malevolent. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and piercing. I started to doubt my sanity. Was I imagining things? Was I going mad? The line between reality and hallucination began to blur. I found a rusty old axe leaning against the wall. I picked it up, the weight of it strangely comforting. It was something real, something tangible, in this nightmare of uncertainty. I sat there, clutching the axe, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. And then, it did. A scratching sound. Faint at first, but growing louder, closer. It was coming from the walls. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I held the axe in front of me, my hands trembling. The scratching grew more frantic, more insistent. It sounded like something was trying to claw its way inside. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room. The shadows seemed to deepen, to coalesce into menacing shapes. The scratching stopped. Silence. And then, a voice, a whisper, so faint I almost didn't hear it. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We know you're here!" I screamed. The cabin began to shake. The walls groaned. The floorboards creaked. I dropped the axe and covered my ears, trying to block out the sound. The voice grew louder, more insistent. "You can't hide from us." The door splintered. I looked up. Standing in the doorway were the villagers. Their faces were contorted in a grotesque parody of smiles. Their eyes burned with a cold, unholy light. Behind them, I saw it. The wooden idol. It was taller than I remembered, its features even more grotesque. Its eyes glowed with an eerie red light. The villagers stepped aside, revealing the idol in all its horrifying glory. And then, it spoke. Its voice was a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. Welcome home. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sensation, a tingling in my skin. I opened my eyes. The cabin was gone. The villagers were gone. The idol was gone. I was standing in the clearing, surrounded by trees. The fire pit was cold and empty. The huts were silent and still. It was as if the village had never existed. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in dirt and blood. I didn't remember getting them dirty. I turned and ran. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I ran until I collapsed on the forest floor, gasping for breath. I lay there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? A nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fear? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I was no longer alone. I could feel it. The presence, the eyes, the waiting. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, watching me. I got to my feet and started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just had to get away. As I walked, I began to notice things again. The strange symbols carved into the trees. The small piles of stones arranged in unnatural patterns. The air grew colder, heavier. The silence was no longer expectant, but oppressive, suffocating. And then, I saw it. A familiar shape in the distance. A cluster of ramshackle huts huddled together like frightened animals. The village. I stopped. I couldn't believe it. I had come full circle. I was back where I started. I turned to run, but it was too late. They were there. The villagers. They emerged from the huts, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. The old woman stepped forward, her face a road map of wrinkles. She smiled. "Welcome back," she said. Her voice was no longer guttural, no longer strange. It was clear and melodic, like the chime of a bell. I stared at her, my mind reeling. You speak English," I stammered. She nodded. "Of course," she said. "We speak many languages." I looked around at the other villagers. They were all smiling, their eyes warm and welcoming. But the chanting, the idol, the sacrifice, I said, my voice trembling. The old woman chuckled. "Oh, that," she said. "That was just a little performance for the tourists." Tourists? I looked around again, taking in the village with new eyes. It was still ramshackle, still isolated, but it didn't seem as menacing as before. "We get a few hikers passing through every year," the old woman said. "They're always looking for something authentic, something exotic." She winked. "So we give them what they want." I stared at her, speechless. "Come," she said. "Come sit by the fire. We'll tell you all about it." She led me back to the fire pit, where the other villagers were waiting. They offered me a bowl of stew. I hesitated, then took it. As I ate, the old woman told me about the village, about its history, its traditions, its performances. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed facade designed to lure in unsuspecting tourists and give them a taste of the macabre. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It had all been a misunderstanding. A terrible, terrifying misunderstanding. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing, I noticed something. The villagers were still smiling, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. And the old woman, as she spoke, kept glancing at something behind me. I turned around. Standing in the shadows behind the huts, a crude wooden idol stood sentinel. It was tall and imposing, its features grotesque and distorted. Its eyes were hollow sockets, filled with what looked like dried blood. Around its neck, a necklace of human teeth gleamed in the firelight. But it wasn't the same idol I had seen before. This one was different. It was familiar. I looked closer, and then I saw it. Carved into the base of the idol, in crude, uneven letters, was my name. I looked back at the villagers. Their smiles had vanished. Their eyes were cold and unwavering. The old woman stepped forward, her voice a low, guttural growl. "Welcome home," she said. And then I understood. The performance wasn't for the tourists. It was for me. I wasn't a tourist. I was one of them. I had always been one of them. I just didn't know it yet. The stew, the metallic tang, the unsettling texture. It wasn't stew. It was blood, and I had been drinking it. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer covered in dirt and blood. They were covered in something else. Something dark and viscous. Something that smelled of decay. Something that felt familiar. I raised my hands to my face, and then I saw it. My reflection. But it wasn't my reflection. It was the idol. My face had been replaced by the grotesque features of the wooden god. My eyes were hollow sockets, filled with an eerie red light. Around my neck, a necklace of human teeth gleamed in the firelight. I screamed, but the sound that came out of my mouth wasn't a scream. It was a growl, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. The villagers bowed before me. "Welcome home," they said. And then I knew. I was no longer a hiker. I was no longer a tourist. I was no longer human. I was the god of the woods, and I was hungry. The chanting began. The fire roared. The villagers swayed. And I, their god, smiled. The performance was about to begin. And this time, it was real. Still awake? Good. Because the next story is waiting. Don't get too comfortable. It might keep you up even longer. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of moonlight slicing through the grimy window, each particle a tiny, mocking spotlight on my solitude. The air in the Blackwood Sanatorium hung thick and stagnant, a miasma of decay and forgotten screams. It clung to me like a shroud, seeping into my pores, poisoning my thoughts. I'd been chasing shadows for weeks, ever since the first disappearance. Young, vibrant people, vanished without a trace. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just gone. The local police were baffled, chalking it up to runaways, drug deals gone wrong, the usual explanations for the unexplainable. But I saw a pattern, a chilling thread connecting them all. They were all active on the same obscure online forum, a breeding ground for urban legends and internet folklore. And they were all obsessed with the legend of the Shadow Man. The Shadow Man. A figure whispered about in hushed tones, a being of pure darkness said to stalk those who believed too strongly, who dared to delve too deep into the forbidden corners of the internet. A boogeyman for the digital age. I'd dismissed it as childish nonsense until the disappearances started. Now, I was here, in the heart of the darkness, the Blackwood Sanatorium. Abandoned for over 50 years, it was a monument to human suffering, a place where sanity had been systematically dismantled and discarded. Local legend claimed it was haunted, that the spirits of the patients still roamed the halls, trapped between worlds. I hadn't believed that either, not until I felt the first prickle of unease on the back of my neck, the sensation of being watched. I pulled my collar tighter, the wool doing little to ward off the bone-chilling cold that permeated the building. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling paint, rusted medical equipment, and the skeletal remains of beds. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and something else, something acrid and metallic, like old blood. I moved deeper into the sanatorium, my footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. Each room was a tableau of forgotten horrors, restraints hanging from walls, surgical instruments scattered on tables, and in one particularly disturbing room, a chair with leather straps, stained a dark, unsettling brown. As I explored, I kept thinking about the Forum, about the Shadow Man. The more I read, the more convinced I became that there was something to it. Something real. The victims had all been actively researching the legend, sharing stories, trying to summon the entity. Had they succeeded? Had they opened a door to something they couldn't control? I found a room that seemed to have been used recently. A circle had been drawn on the floor with chalk, and in the center, a crude symbol that I recognized from the Forum, the sigil of the Shadow Man. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the epicenter. I knelt down, examining the circle. The chalk was fresh, the lines still crisp. Someone had been here recently, someone who believed in the Shadow Man. Or perhaps, someone who was the Shadow Man. A sudden creak from the hallway made me jump. I swung my flashlight around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, playing tricks on my eyes. I told myself it was just the old building settling, the wind whistling through the broken windows. But the feeling of being watched intensified, becoming almost unbearable. I stood up, my hand instinctively reaching for the Glock holstered at my hip. I knew it was ridiculous, bringing a gun to a ghost hunt, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger, that something was hunting me. I moved back into the hallway, my flashlight beam dancing nervously. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. Then, I heard it. A faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper came again, closer this time. A sibilant murmur that seemed to slither into my mind. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Malevolent. Hungry. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. I started to run, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I didn't know where I was going, just away from the whisper, away from the feeling of being watched. I stumbled through the maze of corridors, the sanatorium seeming to shift and change around me, the walls closing in. I reached a large, open room, the old operating theater. A single operating table stood in the center, bathed in moonlight. The room was filled with the ghosts of surgeries past, the echoes of pain and desperation. And then I saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, coalescing in the corner of the room. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but distorted, elongated, as if stretched and pulled from another dimension. It had no discernible features, just a void where its face should be. The Shadow Man. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. The shadow began to move, gliding across the floor towards me. It moved with an unnatural grace, a fluid, unsettling motion that defied the laws of physics. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was constricted, my lungs unable to draw breath. I wanted to run, but my legs were rooted to the spot. The Shadow Man was getting closer, its presence filling the room, suffocating me. I could feel its cold, empty gaze boring into me, stripping away my sanity. Then it spoke. Its voice was a rasping whisper, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke my name, a sound that echoed in my mind, shattering my thoughts. "You sought me out," it said. "Now you are mine." I finally found my voice, a weak, trembling croak. "What do you want?" The Shadow Man didn't answer. It simply reached out a hand, a long, skeletal appendage that seemed to be made of pure darkness. The hand closed around my throat, squeezing, cutting off my air. I clawed at its hand, desperate for breath. My vision began to blur, the room spinning around me. I could feel my consciousness fading, slipping away into the darkness. As I lost consciousness, I saw something that made my blood run even colder. Reflected in the polished steel of the operating table, I saw my own shadow detach itself from my body and merge with the Shadow Man. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the Shadow Man, now bearing my face, smiling. I woke up with a gasp, my body drenched in sweat. I was lying in my bed, in my own apartment. The sun was streaming through the window, casting long shadows across the room. It had all been a dream. I sat up, trying to catch my breath. The dream had been so vivid, so real. I could still feel the Shadow Man's hand around my throat, the cold, empty gaze boring into me. I got out of bed and went to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering effects of the nightmare. As I looked in the mirror, I noticed something strange. My reflection seemed off. The eyes were darker, colder, and there was a subtle distortion around the edges of my face, as if my features were being stretched and pulled. I stared at my reflection, my heart pounding in my chest. The distortion grew stronger, the eyes becoming more malevolent, the smile wider, more sinister. Then, my reflection spoke. "You thought it was just a dream?" it whispered, its voice a rasping chorus. "You thought you could escape me?" I recoiled from the mirror, stumbling backwards. My reflection continued to smile, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "I am always with you," it said. "I am your shadow." I ran from the bathroom, screaming. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I was trapped, hunted by my own reflection, by the Shadow Man. I looked around my apartment, desperately searching for a way out. But there was nowhere to hide. The Shadow Man was everywhere, in every shadow, in every reflection. Then, I saw it. A small, antique mirror hanging on the wall. It was a family heirloom, something I had inherited from my grandmother. I had always been drawn to it, but I had never understood why. Now, I knew. The mirror was a portal, a gateway to the realm of the Shadow Man. It was the source of his power, the key to his existence. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the mirror and smashed it against the wall. The glass shattered into a million pieces, the fragments reflecting the sunlight in a blinding flash. Didas. The mirror shattered. I felt a surge of energy course through my body. The shadows in the room recoiled. The distortions in my reflection faded away. The Shadow Man was gone, but I knew he wasn't truly gone. He was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for another opportunity to strike. And I knew that one day, he would return. I spent the next few weeks trying to piece my life back together. I quit my job, moved to a new city, and tried to forget about the Shadow Man. But I couldn't. Every time I looked in a mirror, I saw his face, lurking beneath the surface of my own. Every time I walked in the shadows, I felt his presence, watching me, waiting. I knew that he was still out there, hunting me. And I knew that one day, he would find me. One night, I was walking home from work. The streets were deserted, the only sound the echo of my own footsteps. As I turned a corner, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, with a long skeletal face and burning red eyes. The Shadow Man. I froze, paralyzed by fear. He smiled, a slow, sinister grin that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Hello, Detective," he said, his voice a rasping whisper. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He stepped out of the shadows, his form solidifying, becoming more real. "You can't escape me," he said. "I am a part of you." He reached out a hand, his fingers long and bony. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, something unexpected happened. A bright light flashed, blinding me. I heard a scream, a high-pitched, inhuman shriek. I opened my eyes and saw the Shadow Man writhing in agony, his body dissolving into smoke. Standing before me was a woman, bathed in a golden light. She was beautiful, with long, flowing hair and eyes that shone like stars. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am an angel," she said. "I have come to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From the darkness," she said. "From the Shadow Man." "But why?" "Because you are special," she said. "You have the power to see the truth, to fight against the darkness." "I don't understand." "You will," she said. "But for now, you must trust me." She reached out her hand and took mine. Her touch was warm and comforting, filling me with a sense of peace. "Come with me," she said. "I will show you the way." I followed her, leaving the shadows behind. As we walked, she told me about the battle between good and evil, about the forces of light and darkness that were constantly vying for control of the world. She told me that the Shadow Man was just one of many entities of darkness, that there were others, even more powerful, lurking in the shadows. She told me that I had been chosen to fight against them, to protect the innocent from their evil. I was scared, but I was also determined. I knew that I couldn't run from the darkness. I had to face it, to fight it, to protect the world from its evil. The angel led me to a hidden sanctuary, a place of light and peace, where I could train and prepare for the battle ahead. I spent months learning about the forces of darkness, about their weaknesses and their strengths. I learned how to fight them, how to protect myself, how to use the power of light to banish them. I became a warrior, a protector, a guardian of the innocent. And one day, I knew that I was ready. I left the sanctuary and returned to the world, ready to face the darkness. I knew that the Shadow Man was still out there, waiting for me. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready for him. I tracked him down to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The warehouse was dark and foreboding, filled with shadows and whispers. I entered the warehouse, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that the Shadow Man was waiting for me. I walked through the warehouse, my senses on high alert. I could feel his presence, lurking in the shadows, watching me. Then, he appeared. He stepped out of the shadows, his form solidifying, becoming more real. He smiled, a slow, sinister grin that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Hello, Detective," he said, his voice a rasping whisper. "I've been waiting for you." "I've been waiting for you too," I said, my voice steady. He laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You think you can defeat me? You are just a mortal, a weakling." "I am more than you think," I said. I am a warrior of light. I raised my hand, and a beam of pure light shot forth, striking the Shadow Man. He screamed in agony, his body dissolving into smoke. But he didn't die. He simply reformed, his form even more grotesque and terrifying than before. "You cannot destroy me," he said. "I am eternal." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can banish you." I closed my eyes and focused my mind, drawing upon the power of light within me. I felt the energy surge through my body, filling me with strength and determination. I opened my eyes and unleashed a torrent of light, engulfing the Shadow Man. He screamed, his body dissolving into nothingness. This time, he was gone for good. I stood in the warehouse, panting, exhausted. The battle was over. I had defeated the Shadow Man. But I knew that there were other battles to be fought, other entities of darkness to be vanquished, and I knew that I would be ready. I left the warehouse and walked into the night, a warrior of light, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The city stretched before me, a tapestry of light and shadow. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within my soul, that my fight had just begun. The shadows still held secrets, and I was now bound to uncover them, to protect the innocent from the darkness that lurked within. The disappearances had stopped, but the feeling of being watched never truly faded. It was a constant reminder of the world beyond our perception, a world where legends walked and nightmares became real. And I, the detective who once scoffed at urban legends, was now its guardian, forever vigilant, forever haunted. The Blackwood Sanatorium was just the beginning. The real horror, I knew, was yet to come. You're still here? Then you're ready. The next story is waiting in the dark. Let's begin. The silence was the first thing. Not the absence of sound, but a thick, suffocating blanket of it that clung to the walls of the cabin, seeped into the marrow of my bones. We were miles from anywhere, nestled deep within the Blackwood Forest, a place the locals whispered about, with a superstitious dread I'd initially dismissed as quaint folklore. Now, I wasn't so sure. The cabin itself was a relic, a forgotten sentinel of rough-hewn logs and shadowed corners. It had been my grandfather's, then my father's, and now, inexplicably, mine. I'd inherited it after my father's. Accident. A fall, they said. But the way my aunt had looked at me, her eyes filled with a pity that bordered on fear, suggested there was more to the story. I'd come here seeking solace, a refuge from the world after the baby, after Thomas. He was beautiful, in a way that made my chest ache. A perfect miniature of his father, with the same dark hair and startling blue eyes. But from the moment they placed him in my arms, something felt wrong. He didn't cry. Not when he was hungry. Not when he needed changing. Not even when he was pricked for his vaccinations. Just those eyes, staring, unblinking, as if he were looking through me, at something beyond. The doctors assured me it was normal. Some babies were just quiet, they said. But I knew. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. A cold, gnawing certainty that this wasn't my son. The hunger started subtly. He'd drain a bottle in minutes, then stare expectantly, his tiny mouth working, as if demanding more. I increased the amount, then the frequency, until he was consuming an impossible amount of formula. Still, he wasn't satisfied. He'd fuss, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine, and his eyes would fixate on me with an intensity that felt predatory. Then came the dreams. Vivid, disturbing visions of gnarled trees, twisting into grotesque shapes, of shadowy figures lurking in the forest, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. I'd wake up screaming, my heart pounding, the silence of the cabin pressing down on me like a tombstone. I tried to tell my husband, Mark, but he just patted my hand and told me I was suffering from postpartum depression. He was a good man, a rational man, a man who couldn't possibly understand the creeping dread that was consuming me. He started working longer hours, staying late at the office, leaving me alone with Thomas. Alone with it. One night, I woke to a scratching sound coming from the baby's room. I crept down the hall, my heart hammering in my chest, and peered inside. Thomas was standing in his crib, his tiny hands gripping the wooden bars, his body swaying rhythmically. His eyes were wide, fixed on the window, and a low, humming sound emanated from his throat. I rushed to his side, scooped him up in my arms, and held him close. He didn't cry, didn't even flinch. He just stared at me, his eyes cold and empty. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Mommy's here." But he wasn't my baby. He was something else. Something other. That's when I started researching. Late at night, while Thomas slept his unnaturally silent sleep, I'd pore over ancient texts and forgotten folklore, searching for an explanation for the horror that had invaded my life. I stumbled upon tales of changelings, of fairy children swapped for human infants, of creatures with an insatiable hunger for something more than just milk. The descriptions were chillingly accurate. The unnerving silence, the unsettling stare, the impossible appetite. It all fit. I knew what I had to do. I packed a bag, grabbed Thomas, and drove to the cabin. I needed to be away from the city, away from Mark, away from the world. I needed to confront whatever this thing was, to protect myself, to protect my family. The cabin was even more oppressive than I remembered. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, and the shadows seemed to writhe and shift in the corners of my eyes. I lit a fire in the hearth, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls, and settled in for the night. Thomas didn't sleep. He just sat in his crib, staring at me, his eyes glowing in the dim light. I tried to ignore him, to convince myself that I was being irrational, that I was just a tired, stressed-out mother. But the feeling of being watched, of being scrutinized, was overwhelming. As the night wore on, the sounds started. Faint whispers, carried on the wind, seemed to snake through the cracks in the walls. Creaking floorboards echoed in the empty rooms. Fleeting shadows danced in the periphery of my vision. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just the old house settling. But I knew better. Something was here with me. Something malevolent. Something hungry. I barricaded the door, stuffed towels under the windows, and huddled in the corner with Thomas, clutching a rusty axe I'd found in the shed. He didn't seem to notice my fear. He just stared, his eyes unwavering. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, coalescing into a chorus of voices that seemed to be calling my name. The floorboards creaked and groaned, as if something heavy were pacing back and forth outside the door. The shadows danced and swirled, taking on grotesque shapes. I started to hallucinate. I saw faces in the wood grain of the walls, leering, mocking faces. I heard laughter, high-pitched and shrill, echoing through the cabin. I felt hands reaching out from the darkness, grasping at my clothes, pulling me towards the abyss. Thomas just watched, his eyes gleaming with an unholy light. I knew I was losing my mind. The isolation, the fear, the lack of sleep, it was all taking its toll. I was trapped in a nightmare, and there was no escape. Then, the scratching started again. This time, it was coming from inside the walls. A frantic, desperate scratching, as if something were trying to claw its way out. I screamed, a primal, guttural sound that echoed through the cabin. I grabbed Thomas and ran to the fireplace, throwing logs onto the fire until the flames roared and crackled. I needed light. I needed warmth. I needed to ward off the darkness. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, until it was deafening. The walls seemed to vibrate, to pulsate with an unholy energy. And then, with a splintering crash, the wall behind the fireplace exploded inward, showering me with dust and debris. Standing in the gaping hole was a figure, tall and gaunt, with skin as pale as moonlight, and eyes that burned with an unearthly fire. It was vaguely humanoid, but its limbs were too long, its joints too angular, its face too wrong. It reached out a skeletal hand towards Thomas, and the baby cooed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. That's when I understood. Thomas wasn't a changeling. He was a beacon, a lure. He hadn't been replaced. He had been summoned. The creature stepped into the cabin, its eyes fixed on Thomas. It reached out and gently took him from my arms. Thomas didn't cry. He just smiled, a wide, toothless grin that sent a chill down my spine. The creature turned to me, its eyes filled with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. It opened its mouth, and a voice, cold and hollow, echoed through the cabin. "Thank you," it said. "You have served your purpose." Then it turned and walked back into the hole in the wall, disappearing into the darkness. Thomas gurgled happily in its arms. I stood there, frozen in place, as the hole in the wall slowly closed, the wood reforming itself as if nothing had happened. The scratching stopped. The whispers faded. The shadows receded. The silence returned, thicker and more oppressive than ever before. I was alone, or so I thought. As I stood there, trembling, I noticed something on the floor. A small wooden toy, carved in the shape of a bird. It was old, worn, and covered in dust. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It felt strangely familiar. Then, I remembered. It was my toy. My favorite toy, from when I was a child. But I hadn't seen it in years. Not since I'd lost it in the woods behind my grandfather's cabin. I looked around the room, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The cabin seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. And then, I saw it. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. A fleeting glimpse of something tall and gaunt, with skin as pale as moonlight, and eyes that burned with an unearthly fire. It was standing in the shadows, watching me, and it was smiling. I screamed, a long, drawn-out scream that echoed through the empty cabin. I dropped the toy and ran, stumbling through the darkness, desperate to escape. But there was nowhere to run. The cabin was alive. It was watching me. It was waiting for me. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was never going to leave. I ran for days, or perhaps it was only hours. Time had lost all meaning. I was lost in the woods, surrounded by gnarled trees and whispering shadows. I was hunted, pursued by something I couldn't see, something I couldn't understand. I ate berries and drank from streams, trying to stay alive, trying to hold on to my sanity. But the hunger was growing, a gnawing emptiness that mirrored the emptiness inside me. I started to see things, faces in the trees, figures lurking in the shadows. I heard voices, whispering my name, calling me closer. I knew I was losing my mind. One day, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, ancient and weathered. I felt drawn to it, compelled to enter. As I stepped into the circle, the ground began to tremble. The air crackled with energy. The trees swayed and groaned. And then, the sky opened up. A beam of light shone down from the heavens, illuminating the clearing. In the center of the light stood the creature, tall and gaunt, with skin as pale as moonlight, and eyes that burned with an unearthly fire. It was holding Thomas. The creature smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Welcome home," it said. I looked at Thomas, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. A flicker of recognition, a spark of understanding. He reached out his tiny hand towards me, and I took it. As I did, I felt a surge of energy coursing through my veins. My body began to change, to twist and contort. My skin paled, my limbs lengthened, my eyes burned with an unearthly fire. I was becoming one of them. The creature laughed, a cold, hollow laugh that echoed through the clearing. "You are one of us now," it said. "You are home." I looked at my reflection in the creature's eyes, and I saw the truth. I had always been one of them. The cabin wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. Thomas wasn't a lure. He was a key. And I wasn't a victim. I was a vessel. The hunger wasn't for milk. It was for something more. It was for power. It was for control. It was for souls. I looked at the creature, and I smiled. "What do we do now?" I asked. The creature's smile widened. "We wait," it said. "We wait for the next one." And as I stood there, bathed in the unearthly light, I knew that my nightmare had just begun. Years passed, or perhaps it was only days. Time had lost all meaning. I was trapped in the Blackwood Forest, a prisoner of my own twisted desires. I lived with the creatures, learning their ways, embracing their darkness. I learned to hunt, to stalk, to feed. I learned to lure unsuspecting travelers into the forest, to trap them in the circle of stones, to offer them as sacrifices to the ancient gods. I became a monster. But even as I reveled in my newfound power, a part of me still remembered. A part of me still mourned the life I had lost, the son I had abandoned. And so, I waited. I waited for the day when I could escape, when I could break free from the creature's grasp, when I could reclaim my humanity. One night, as I was wandering through the forest, I stumbled upon a familiar sight. A small, wooden cabin, nestled deep within the trees. It was my grandfather's cabin. I felt a pang of longing, a flicker of hope. Perhaps, I thought, I could still find a way back. I approached the cabin cautiously, my senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, and the shadows seemed to writhe and shift in the corners of my eyes. I peered through the window, and I saw a figure sitting by the fire. A woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with fear. She was holding a baby. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized her. It was me. Or rather, it was the woman I used to be. The woman who had been trapped in the cabin. The woman who had been driven to the brink of madness. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, we stared at each other. Two versions of the same person, separated by time and experience. And then, she screamed. I recoiled, startled by her reaction. I hadn't realized how monstrous I had become. She grabbed the baby and ran, stumbling through the darkness, desperate to escape. I watched her go, my heart filled with a mixture of pity and despair. I knew what she was going through. I knew the fear, the isolation, the creeping dread, and I knew that there was no escape. I turned and walked away, back into the darkness of the forest. I was a monster, and I would always be a monster. But perhaps, I thought, I could still use my power for good. Perhaps I could protect others from the fate that had befallen me. Perhaps I could become a guardian of the forest, a protector of the innocent. It was a long shot, but it was the only hope I had left. And so, I wandered through the Blackwood Forest, a solitary figure, forever trapped between two worlds. A monster and a protector. A prisoner and a guardian. Forever alone. Forever haunted. The silence, as always, followed. Your eyes are still open, and so is the night. Let's move to the next story. It's not any softer than the last. The house exhaled dust with every gust of wind that rattled its bones. It stood on a promontory overlooking the churning Atlantic, a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the unforgiving sky. My grandfather, Silas, had called it Havenwood, a cruel jest, considering the palpable sense of dread that clung to it like sea salt. He'd died here, alone, and now, by some twisted stroke of fate, it was mine. I hadn't seen Silas in 20 years, not since I was a boy who'd accidentally broken his prized telescope. He'd never forgiven me, and I'd never forgotten the cold fury in his eyes. Now, I was here, inheriting his legacy of solitude and, apparently, a house full of unsettling antiques. The lawyer, a nervous man with perpetually damp palms, had handed me the keys with a visible shudder. He was a collector, he'd stammered, avoiding my gaze. An eccentric one. Eccentric was an understatement. The interior of Havenwood was a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten things. Taxidermied animals, with vacant eyes, stared from dusty shelves. Portraits of stern-faced men and women, their identities lost to time, lined the walls, their gazes following me as I moved. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else. Something indefinably rotten. I found it in the attic, tucked away beneath a moth-eaten tapestry, depicting a scene of grotesque revelry. A mirror. Not just any mirror, but a massive, ornate thing framed in blackened silver, its surface clouded with age. It was beautiful, in a morbid, unsettling way. The glass was so old, so thick, that it seemed to swallow the light, reflecting back a distorted, almost liquid image. I ran a gloved hand over the frame, tracing the intricate carvings of writhing figures, faces contorted in silent screams, bodies locked in eternal torment. A shiver ran down my spine. I should have left it there, buried beneath the dust and cobwebs. But something compelled me to clean it, to see what lay beneath the grime. Hours later, after scrubbing with a mixture of vinegar and trepidation, the mirror gleamed. It was still distorted, the silvering cracked and peeling in places. But now I could see my reflection. A tired, drawn version of myself stared back, the lines around my eyes etched deeper than I remembered. I dismissed it as exhaustion. The house was getting to me. I needed sleep. That night I dreamt of Havenwood. The house was alive, groaning and shifting in the darkness. I wandered through its endless corridors, the portraits whispering my name, the taxidermied animals twitching in their glass eyes. Then, I found myself standing before the mirror. My reflection was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of blackness. A voice, ancient and malevolent, echoed from within, promising oblivion. I woke up in a cold sweat, the dream clinging to me like a shroud, The house was silent, save for the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the cliffs below. I told myself it was just a dream, a product of stress and an overactive imagination. But the feeling of unease persisted. The next day, I found myself drawn back to the mirror. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to examine the craftsmanship of the frame more closely. But deep down, I knew there was something else, something darker, pulling me in. I stood before it, staring at my reflection. This time, it was different. There was a subtle change, a faint discoloration around my eyes, a hint of decay in the corners of my mouth. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. I was imagining things, I told myself. The light was playing tricks on me, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few days, the changes became more pronounced. The discoloration spread. The lines on my face deepened. My skin took on a sickly pallor. Each time I looked in the mirror, saw a more grotesque version of myself, a corpse slowly rotting before my eyes. I tried to avoid the mirror, but it was no use. It was as if it was calling to me, beckoning me to witness my own demise. I started seeing it everywhere, in the darkened windows, in the polished surfaces of the antique furniture, even in the reflections of the puddles in the garden. The house seemed to be feeding on my fear. The whispers grew louder. The shadows danced in the corners of my eyes. The floorboards creaked and groaned with every step I took. I felt like I was being watched, followed, hunted. I tried to rationalize it. The house was old, isolated, and filled with unsettling objects. It was bound to play tricks on my mind. But the rational explanations felt hollow, inadequate, in the face of the growing terror that consumed me. One evening, as the storm raged outside, I found myself standing before the mirror again. The power had gone out, and the only light came from the flickering candles I had placed around the room. My reflection was barely visible in the gloom, but I could see enough. The decay was rampant now. My skin was peeling. My eyes were sunken and lifeless. My teeth were bared in a grotesque grin. I screamed, a primal sound of pure terror. I stumbled back, knocking over a candelabra. The flames spread quickly, licking at the tapestry on the wall. As the fire grew, illuminating the room in a hellish glow, I saw something else in the mirror. Behind my decaying reflection, I saw a figure. Tall, gaunt, and cloaked in shadows. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its eyes on me. Cold and malevolent. It raised a hand, beckoning me closer. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was the source of the horror, the thing that had been waiting for me in Havenwood. It had been waiting for me in the mirror. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, trapped in the gaze of the figure in the mirror. The fire was closing in, the heat searing my skin. The house was burning around me, but I couldn't escape. I was doomed to die here, in Havenwood, consumed by the flames and the darkness that had been lurking in the mirror. Then, the figure in the mirror spoke. Its voice was a rasping whisper, a sound that seemed to claw its way into my mind. "Welcome home," it said. And then, everything went black. I woke up coughing, my lungs burning. The room was filled with smoke, the air thick with the smell of burning wood. I was lying on the floor, the tapestry above me engulfed in flames. I scrambled to my feet, coughing and choking. I had to get out of here. I stumbled through the burning house, the flames licking at my clothes. The portraits on the walls seemed to be laughing at me, their eyes glowing in the firelight. The taxidermied animals were gone, consumed by the flames. I finally reached the front door, but it was blocked by debris. I pushed and shoved, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Despair washed over me. I was going to die here, in Havenwood, just like my grandfather. Then, I saw it. The mirror. It was still standing, miraculously untouched by the flames. The figure was still there, waiting for me. I knew what I had to do. I ran towards the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I reached the mirror and plunged my hand through the glass. It shattered, the shards cutting into my skin. But I didn't feel the pain. I felt something else, something cold and alien, pulling me in. I stepped through the mirror, into the darkness. I found myself in a place that defied description. It was a realm of shadows and swirling mists, of grotesque shapes and impossible geometries. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the sound of whispers. The figure was there, waiting for me. It stepped out of the shadows, revealing its face. It was me, but not the me I knew. This was a twisted, corrupted version of myself, a being of pure malice and despair. Its eyes were black pits. Its skin was stretched taut over its skull. Its teeth were long and sharp. "You are home now," it said, its voice a perfect echo of my own. "You are one of us." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped, bound to this nightmarish realm, forever to be a part of the horror that had been lurking in the mirror. Then, I understood. The mirror wasn't just a portal to another dimension. It was a reflection of my own soul, a manifestation of the darkness that had always been within me. Havenwood wasn't just a house. It was a prison, a place where the darkness could fester and grow. And now, I was trapped here, forever. I looked back at the shattered mirror, at the burning house beyond. I saw my reflection, the decaying corpse that I had seen in the mirror. It was no longer just a vision. It was my reality. I was dead. I had been dead all along. The figure smiled, a grotesque, terrifying grin. "Welcome to your eternity," it said. And then, the darkness closed in. I am writing this from within the mirror. I am trapped, bound to this realm of shadows and despair. I am no longer myself. I am something else, something darker, something other. I can see you, reader. I can see you through the screen, through the words. I can feel your fear, your unease. You think you are safe, but you are wrong. The mirror is always watching. The darkness is always waiting. And one day, it will come for you, too. The house still stands, or what's left of it. The locals whisper stories of the man who inherited Havenwood, the man who went mad and burned it to the ground. They say his ghost still haunts the ruins, searching for a way back to the world of the living. They don't know the truth. They don't know that the man is still alive, trapped in the mirror, waiting for his next victim. They don't know that the mirror is still there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be found. And when it is found, the cycle will begin again. The darkness will spread. The horror will continue. And you, reader, will be next. I can feel it. I can see it. The mirror is calling. Are you ready to answer? The old woman, Ilara, who lived on the outskirts of town, always warned people about Havenwood. She claimed Silas, my grandfather, had dabbled in things he shouldn't have. Things that opened doors to places best left undisturbed. She spoke of rituals, of pacts made in the dead of night, of a mirror that served as a gateway. I dismissed her stories as the ramblings of a senile old woman. But now, trapped in this nightmare, I understand. Elara knew the truth. She knew what Silas had done, and she knew what was waiting for me. The figure, my corrupted self, is always with me. It whispers in my ear, showing me visions of the horrors that await me in this realm. It feeds on my fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. I try to resist, to cling to the memory of who I once was. But it's no use. The darkness is too strong. It's consuming me, turning me into something else. I can feel myself changing. My thoughts are becoming twisted. My desires are becoming perverse. I am losing myself, piece by piece. Soon, there will be nothing left of the man I once was. I will be nothing more than a puppet of the darkness, a tool of the mirror. And then, I will be sent back to the world of the living, to find a new host, a new victim. I will lure them in, just as I was lured in. I will show them the mirror, and they will be drawn to it, just as I was drawn to it. And then, the cycle will begin again. The darkness will spread. The horror will continue. And you, reader, will be next. I can't stop it. I can't escape. I am trapped. I am doomed. But perhaps, there is still a way. Perhaps, if I can warn you, if I can make you understand the danger, you can avoid the same fate. You must stay away from Havenwood. You must stay away from the mirror. You must resist the darkness. It will be difficult. The darkness is seductive. It promises power, knowledge, and escape from the pain of the world. But it is a lie. The darkness only offers oblivion. You must fight it. You must cling to the light. You must remember who you are. And you must never, ever look into the mirror. Because if you do, it will see you, it will know you, and it will come for you. I am running out of time. The figure is getting closer. It knows what I am doing. It is angry. I can feel its rage. I must hurry. Remember my words. Heed my warning. Stay away from Havenwood. Stay away from the mirror. Save yourself. Before it's too late. Before the darkness consumes you. Before you become one of us. Goodbye. I am gone. The mirror is waiting. Are you ready? The final entry, scrawled in what I can only assume was blood, ended abruptly. The laptop, found clutched in the skeletal hand of a long-dead vagrant who'd apparently taken shelter in the ruins of Havenwood, was cold. The screen flickered, displaying the last chilling words. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The story was unsettling, disturbing. But it was just a story, right? A work of fiction, conjured from the depths of a disturbed mind. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling slightly. The air in the abandoned police station, where I'd brought the laptop for analysis, felt suddenly cold. I glanced around, half expecting to see something. Something watching me. Ridiculous, I thought. I was letting a story get to me. I was a seasoned detective, hardened by years of dealing with the worst of humanity. I wasn't afraid of ghost stories, but the feeling of unease persisted. I packed up the laptop, placing it carefully in an evidence bag. As I did, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the darkened screen. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something else in the reflection. Something darker. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. But as I walked out of the police station into the cold, dark night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if the story was true? What if the mirror was real? What if it was waiting for me? Days turned into weeks, and the case of the Havenwood vagrant faded into the background. I tried to forget about the story, to dismiss it as a morbid fantasy, but it lingered in the back of my mind, a nagging sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Then, one day, I received a package. It was a large, heavy box, addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it with trepidation. Inside, nestled in layers of packing peanuts, was a mirror. A massive, ornate thing framed in blackened silver, its surface clouded with age. My blood ran cold. I knew instantly what it was. The Havenwood mirror. But how? Who had sent it? And why? I stared at the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. It was beautiful, in a morbid, unsettling way. The glass was so old, so thick, that it seemed to swallow the light, reflecting back a distorted, almost liquid image. I ran a gloved hand over the frame, tracing the intricate carvings of writhing figures, faces contorted in silent screams, bodies locked in eternal torment. A shiver ran down my spine. I should have destroyed it. I should have smashed it into a million pieces. But I didn't. Something compelled me to clean it, to see what lay beneath the grime. Hours later, after scrubbing with a mixture of vinegar and trepidation, the mirror gleamed. It was still distorted, the silvering cracked and peeling in places. But now I could see my reflection. A tired, drawn version of myself stared back, the lines around my eyes etched deeper than I remembered. I dismissed it as exhaustion. The case had been getting to me. I needed sleep. But as I turned away from the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the cycle had begun again. That's the end of tonight's stories. If sleep doesn't come, just know you're not alone. I'll be back with more. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Rest easy, if you can.